You online? Yeah.
You will no longer be able to reconnect. And there we go.
Oh,
All
all right.
right, we
There.
are live. Okay. So again, right, like what we are seeing right now here in America, around the world, in France, Nepal, you name it, Indonesia, right? These are all signs of the world waking up to the reality that these systems, these late stage systems of capitalism are fundamentally failing. I think that class
Yep.
conscious is honestly on a rise. I think it's a matter of time.
Yep. 100%. I reckon even in the Western world, I mean, as we talked about with France, even in the Western world, it's heavily on the rise. The our elections here in Norway was or basically got completed like 2 days ago, and the results were staggeringly like we want something different, we want something new, despite the results being in favor of the right wing parties. The like democratic socialists, the social democrats, and so on, they went down heavily. And so yeah, the right wing parties are still like on the rise, but so is the revolutionary party, you know. And so even in the Western world, it seems like people want change. We had Luigi Mangione apparently, quote unquote, killing a CEO, and then now we have Charlie Kirk being shot during like a debate, and yeah, so
Yeah.
is
I
my turn.
mean, no, you're
Yeah.
you're you're saying it perfectly. We need these events to keep continuing to happen because it is the waking up of the masses. It is the waking up. It is the um, coming of class conscious behavior.
Yeah, 100%. Everything that we're seeing at the moment is leading up to a point in which people are looking for something different. Now, of course, this is where the role of communists come in, you know, or like syndicalists, or I'm sorry, Michael, I don't know what you go by at this point, but yeah, like this is where the role of the revolutionaries essentially come in, where we can't just sit idly by and just kind of wait for people to come to us. No, because the reactionaries are already trying to drag them towards their position, you know. Uh, and so, in a way to kind of push against this is by actually being there on the ground and meeting people where they are. I think that's the most important thing that we need to focus on at the moment. So, organizing this popular sentiment against the current regime and educating people into understanding, one, that elections, well, they're a sham, and two, I mean that one's obvious, but two, the fact that like the right isn't going to fix anything. Right. I think even with sort of right wing sentiment, it even goes into the former example of like, oh, elections somehow working, because people go like, yeah, yeah, just vote for the right, and then we'll have this new society. It's sort of a revolutionary sentiment dumbed down in two factors: the that markets will somehow save you, and that what's it called, one, that markets will somehow save you, and that elections will somehow bring about this massive change, whether it is right wing or left wing. Right?
Right. And I think fundamentally at the end of the day, the reality has to kind of be thrown in front of people to the fact that electoralism under capitalism, under any sort of bourgeois system, is fundamentally going to be anti-democratic. The Democratic Party goes off the basis of democracy all the time, but yet they themselves are being bought up by the same super PACs, by the same lobbyists as the Republicans. And this isn't even just an American thing. This is a generally an entire Western thing. Look at the UK, where all the labor movements have been shut down, where the state violence has been used to crush the pro-Palestinian voices. And now we're literally seeing these debates in the British government over whether or not they should continue to support Israel or if it is just another like Russo-Ukraine situation. And I think that this is showing the very like consolidation of power under capitalism. It is this blind faith that reactionary culture will use to lure you in, to lure people who use victimhood in, and then it will turn around and it will diminish everything that they have ever done. It is basic culture war mentality.
Yeah, 100%. I think, especially when it comes to the culture war, it is very much weaponized by both reactionaries and, ironically, um, kind of reactionary revolutionaries. You have a lot of them begin to kind of hyper focus on just like, no, guys, we need to focus on this individual issue. And okay, sure, you can
Like the
do that,
ACB.
but yeah, but we saw historically that the most effective ways of getting different interest groups together isn't by organizing them directly into just one mass organization. Instead, by basically being aligned with those interest groups. And I'm not saying like, oh, splinter up the left. Fuck no. But I am saying, for example, the Black Panther Party, they had the White Panthers, right? They had the Rainbow Coalition. You had when the Bolsheviks took power, they assimilated some of, for example, the left SRs and Mensheviks and so on, not into just one ideological, just monolith, but rather into different sort of like what's called subgroups, I guess you could say, if that makes sense.
No, it
But
absolutely makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. It's kind of a tactic that we've seen used again and again by the right, right? Is where they'll use any sort of like marginalization to break us apart, to keep us separated, so that we don't come together and realize the class dichotomy of it, and we are pinpoint against each other. And this is going to continue to happen until we can spread enough voice, enough awareness of the true intent and the true coalition of major parties and political systems. I think that this is something that is being slowly revealed. And, I me being in America here, right? I know that you're in Norway, Greg, but me being in America, I'm looking at like New York, for example. New York, where Donnie is running for mayor, right? And people are realizing that he's talking about the fact that both of these parties are trying to team up against him, and they're both funding billionaires and Zionist organizations, and it's coming to light at the end of the day that we are divided on all fronts and that we need to put those divisions away and come together as a class and organize around that class basis first.
yeah, I think people like Mumdani has been a heavily radicalizing force. I know that people said the same about like Bernie, like oh, popularizing socialism and so on, and yeah, it can definitely be that. But I think again, this comes into what I was talking about earlier with like the role of the communists, because we can't just sit around and be like, yeah, okay, they're getting radicalized, they're getting radicalized, and then what happens? Well, nothing, we have
We're
to be actively taking that radical energy and pushing it towards
exactly.
more.
It is a matter of
Yeah,
asking the question and acting on the question. When and where does radicalization, radical populism actually transform into revolution? And this is something that needs to be discussed more on mainstream. And honestly, like I'm sick of hearing the same talking points over and over. I'm sick of hearing people being like, "Oh, you want universal healthcare? You must be a radical socialist. You must be a leftist extremist, right?" At the end of the day, we all know the things that people want, that the masses want, but it's a matter of you're not going to achieve them just by voting in and popularizing the ideas. Because at the end of the day, capital flows in a manner that is always going to be outside of your class interest as a working class, as a middle class American. And this needs to be something that is understood. And I
Mhm.
mean, we see it right now. We see it right now in France. France is under a state of literal chaos. It is in decay because its government has literally shut down its entire economy, has shut down everything. And now people are realizing, okay, universal healthcare, education, these things are indispensable. Concessions are not victories granted, and this is something that we need to stress as communists. We can side with reformists and we can side with social democrats and soc dems all day long, but they're not going to have the recognition that something fundamentally needs to happen. We
100%.
must take that initiative.
Mhm. I think the one thing that my party does a lot is that it tries to emphasize, like, hey, we need to defend the welfare state. But I think something that it's kind of lost in that is, why do we need to defend the welfare state? Um, you have, like, the initial point was, we are a working class party, and as a working class party we advocate for working class interests, right? We do not want to accelerate capitalism, because fundamentally that sort of idea becomes counter-revolutionary. You're only serving the hands of the bourgeoisie. But as this party began kind of going into that sort of aspect of just like, oh yeah, we need to defend the welfare state, we need to defend the welfare state over and over and over again, it kind of pushed that as the main emphasis rather than revolutionary change, right? And now we're seeing a major development of sort of right wing social democrats within that party. So I do think that there's a dichotomy, though. You need to, one, understand the underlying aspect of, why do you, for an example, advocate for universal health care? Why do you advocate for like national ownership of resources and so on, without sort of going on to that sort of, I guess you could say, fetishization of those aspects? Because if you begin to fetishize them, you turn towards like a right wing sort of ideology of it, you know.
Oh, okay. So here I open up Substack, and here's the first thing I read. Ready? Nepal, Bangladesh, and Indonesia showing us how it's done. They overthrew their government in Nepal in 48 hours. Nobody waited around for the next election. Next election, they saw a problem and and addressed it. So, like, this is the thing. The world is generally waking up. This is the sentiment that we need, because we are going to keep running into the fact that people are going to fetishize these aspects, and these aspects will never come along, and they'll never actually improve the conditions that allow for what we're seeing today. All it's going to do is, okay, boom bust cycle. It's going to get better for a couple of years, and then it's going to go back to this. And probably the next time it's going to be even worse than what we have now. It happens every damn time. I mean, this is literally where the Keynesian school of thought came about, was after the failures of the capitalism after World War One and World War Two, there were talks about, oh, how can we improve it? How can we do better? And then Keynesian economics made all their reforms. You got benefits for about 20, 30 years after, and then recessions hit again in the 60s.
Yeah.
What came after that? Oh, the talk about, trying to build better, trying to do it better. Reaganomics then came along in the 90s. And then what happened after Reaganomics? 2008 financial crisis. Like, so we see this every time, where the left will generally side with reformists. They'll get the policies that they want, education, healthcare, etc. And then they'll be taken away, stripped from us, and it'll be at worse factors and worse outcomes than what was prior. And so, yeah, you're not. We need to look around the world and recognize what is going on.
Yeah, 100%. I reckon when you talk about like the downturns, what I find very interesting about about those sorts of periods is that they are like, of course, yeah, naturally they are cyclical. They go in constant cycles, but every single time they pop up, it's another sort of just bullshit being thrown back. Like, no, actually, it isn't because of this or that. It isn't because of that or this. No, it's actually because of, this or that, right? So you talk about, for example, let's take the whole Luigi shooting the CEO, right? This was an outburst um, of violence directed towards a specific class that had fucked him over, right? This was a very blatant sentiment, right? And people were celebrating it for good reasons. But then the second that this happened, suddenly out of nowhere, you see again this sort of culture war bullshit start popping up again. Like, oh guys, would you rather fight 100 gorilla or like what? Would you fight a gorilla if you had 100 people? That sort of bullshit. It's like I do not care. I do not care. Right? They went on with the fucking men trend, right? Where they would just be filming dudes and then going like, "Oh my god, look at how dumb he looks." It's like I do not care, right? Like you end up in this sort of bullshit position that is imposed by if this is intentional by some fucking I don't know, going kind of conspiratorial here, but like, oh, deep state, whatever the fuck, right? Like, if this is Fed operations or if it's just like a natural outcome of desaturation to politics, I don't know. But the same trend pops up again and again and again. And like, as revolutionary left, we constantly end up in the same problem where we just kind of, instead of tackling it as what it is, a diversion, we engage in it and go like, no, guys, we look, you can fight like a gorilla if you had 100 men. Like, I don't care. I don't care.
You know, I think about it sometimes and I'm like, okay, we see what's going on in the world. Okay, we see what's going on in the world here in the West. We know it. We're very aware of it. Half the time, the cause of it, right? And we have to understand that we are the cause of it, being in Western countries. But we see the way that Nepal, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and all these other uh, third world, second world countries are taking action upon their governments that are oppressing them, that are exploiting them, alienating them, and outright just refusing to do what is even close to ethical or moral, right? And then we come home and it's like, okay, how many Luigis? How many Luigis time and time again do we need to have before the populace realizes we need to do more? We need to take that next step further. How many Harley Kirk incidences, shooters do we need to have? How many attempts on acting upon cultural and popular sentiment do we need to have before something is done? And yeah, there's always the worry, right? There's always the worry that co-oping and the FBI and the CIA are going to, you know, move into our movements and tear them apart from the inside out. So why is it that we realize that there's this consolidation upward, that there's this power hierarchical structure upward, and yet we know that culturally, politically, and by the mass scale of people, these things are disapproved. Like we don't agree with it, but yet we never act on that disagreement with it.
I think when it comes to specifically the part on like how many Luigis do we need to have, I think honestly just one. You just need one, and that should be enough. Luigi is still pretty relevant. People are still talking about him. People are still like talking about all of it, and people who try to follow in his footsteps are kind of
Yes.
seen as like emulating him. And so already he's pierced the popular consensus. So again, what I said earlier, like people do see that problem.
Right.
Um, People understand it. I think what has been the major problem is that we haven't been able to grasp onto that. We haven't been able to take that popular feeling and emotion and push that towards something radical. Because
You're right.
when
You're absolutely
people
right.
are,
I've spent the better half of the day probably after I got home from eating lunch. So maybe not half the day, but I've spent a good part of my day reading through what has been going on with Charlie Kirk, understanding all the news reports that have been coming out, the political commentary online, and I've recognized two sides of it, right? There's the people that are outright celebrating it and that are cheering it along, which okay, I get that. Trust me, I'm not whining. I'm not shedding a tear myself in any way. And then there's also the people that are like, oh, this needs to be something that we need to feel sorry for, that we need to, cry about, that we need
The
to.
hand-wringing dumbasses.
Right, right. I guess the point that I'm getting at though is when it came to Kirk, I responded to some people earlier today. I was like, look, I have no room in my compassion for a fundamentally evil ideology such as ultranationalism, Zionism, Nazism. I have no room to become passionate about something that is outright committing war crimes, that is outright committing what happened to Charlie Kirk on a daily basis, and there's no condemnation for that. We're going to sit here and we're going to condemn what happened to Kirk, but we're not going to look about the daily activity of this same thing going on across the sea and be like, oh, we have the power to stop that. But it's okay. We're going to keep allowing it to happen. Because, yeah, yeah, that's where we get all of our political money from. Israel lobbies us, right? So we can't turn our back on them. Like, what the hell? And you're really going to say what was it that Trump said that he is the that no one was more connected to the American youth than Charlie? Like, come on. The
His
vast majority
audience
of
is
the
like all
American
boomers.
youth, yeah, the vast majority of the American youth disagrees with Charlie. The vast majority of the American youth is condemning daily what is going on across the ocean. Like, yeah, this is ridiculous.
yeah, 100%. I think again, I'm gonna bring up Norway here because that's what I'm most familiar with. But we kind of have our own version of Charlie Kirk. His name is Simon Bella, and the vast majority of people do not like him. He's not like seen as like a cool dude. He's just seen as a good speaker, right? And I think that's kind of what they have because a lot of them mostly just have rhetoric. Whenever about like the right here in Norway, the popular consensus is generally that if the right were to actually expose their economic views, people would not vote for them. And this is why they constantly talk about anything but economy, anything else but economy. Because the second that they talk about actual economy, they understand that they're fucked. They understand that they have nothing to say. Because how the fuck do you pitch? Yeah, give more money to the rich. Well, I say that, but we are also talking about America, and
No,
okay,
you're perfectly right to bring up Norway. And it's kind of this mentality that we need to, as a general left, as a general movement, get away from where, okay, yeah, we know that if we ever get a welfare state in this country, the right is going to be politically, economically a minority, but they're still going to hold that cultural control over us. So
yeah,
how do we combat that? Well, we have to realize one, this cultural control is coming from the very economic relations that are still existing. You don't you may not be willing to enrich the billionaires and millionaires in your country. One thing that your welfare state does, and I'm not blaming you, Greg, I'm just saying in general welfare states do this, is that they preserve the very control economic control and economic relations that the bourgeoisie, that the capitalists have over the state. It's just no longer privatized, but now they have a kind of a symbiotic relationship with the state, where the state acts as this corporate entity, and the corporate entity will maintain the benefit and the interest of the rich and of the billionaires insofar as basic needs for middle class people are semi met, and that you continue to give consolidations, right? And it's kind of like I can't ever remember who it was, but there was somebody in an interview that I remember watching, and he said that in the 2024 election in the U.S. it wasn't an election about left versus right. Most
Mm.
elections in Western democracies are no longer about left versus right. What they are is corporatists on one side and oligarchs on the other. And the difference between all corporatists and oligarchs is corporatists want to preserve the model. They want
Mm.
stability at all costs because stability creates alignment. Alignment creates absolute
Yeah.
control, and that means they'll have no opposition, and that means they can continue to do what they want insofar as they have no opposition. The
Mm.
oligarchs, on the other hand, want a state of deconstruction. That way, they can torture and and deconstruct and torture and suppress the masses altogether. They want a living hell for their society so that they can rebuild it up in their image for their power. That is what oligarchs do. And so when you have this scenario, as uh, as you say, right? Um, the the people in in Norway and the people in Sweden and Finland who are right wing, they can only control you on a cultural aspect, because the moment they start talking
Yeah.
about economics, all of their arguments and all of their movements fall apart. They
Yeah.
are able to talk about culture, and they get so much attention, so much control over cultural aspects because the state allows them to. The state funds that
Mm.
kind of talking points for them.
I think we have to look at where do people get that culture from to begin with. Obviously, movies, social media, and so on. But how do they enter these spaces? How do they communicate these ideas? Again, I'm going to bring up the elections here because that's very relevant for me now. Da da da. It doesn't matter.
No, feel
But
free.
um, yeah, so when we watched the school result, which was overwhelmingly far right, the results of like the school elections, which is from the age of 17 to 19, maybe 20, depending on certain conditions, but the 20 and up are usually in a minority. It doesn't matter. When we watch these elections, we okay, first, a bit of a context. The way that the school elections here work is that parties go to a local school, they have a debate, they stand there where they talk to people and basically like communicate with them, and then the student go to vote. But because of time, occasionally you can go vote first, and then you have the debate. Now, these statistics are public online, and so we checked these. We went through all of the what's called the results, and we found that out that it didn't matter if the debate happened before or after. The results were always the same trend over and over and over again. And the conclusion which we came to was that people had already decided what they were going to vote for. Now, this goes into what I was saying with communicating the idea. Where do people get that culture from? Well, people, as mentioned, the Progress Party relies, just like any fucking right wing party of any kind. If this is the Republicans, the Democrats, the Social Democrats in Sweden, the like, yeah, whatever, the what's that guy? Reform UK, that guy. Like, it doesn't matter. All of them rely on the same aspect of just taking the culture, or just talking about purely culture, just identity bullshit. But the way that they get these ideas out there is so crucial. They rely on how the internet functions as a tool. The internet basically being the monopoly, or having a monopoly on people's attention span now, is the modern book. It is the modern newspaper. It is the modern, just all of it, television, radio, whatever. Right. That is where people get their ideas from. That is where people hear rhetoric from different organizations, parties, whatever. Right. And so they go onto there, and they try to hold a monopoly through, for an example, which is something that was recently came out, which was that a port in Narvik had been essentially force feeding right wing propaganda to its workers over and over and over again. And as such, the results from the port workers was overwhelmingly right wing. So when they are constantly surrounded by right wing propaganda, by right wing bullshit, they then go to their friends and they say, "Hey, have you seen this piece of propaganda or this thing that says this," which usually is a form of propaganda.
Right.
And they communicate between themselves. So, for example, worker or student A go to worker or student B, and they say, "I've seen this thing. Look at this." And then worker or student B goes to worker and student C and do the same thing, and they constantly communicate these ideas.
So
I
yeah,
think that goes into the whole concept of like a counterculture and whatever, but I'm not going to get into that. But again, they have a monopoly on how people interact with each other in the first place. Because the second that you're not like working or studying or whatever, you are being hounded, absolutely hounded by that propaganda.
it is
Right.
interesting that you recognize this in Europe, in Norway, because honestly, this is what the left is lacking, right? And let me explain, right? For For so long, the right has been the side of populism. The right has been the side of cultural domination. The right has been the side of spreading and out and out delivering propaganda. We've seen it everywhere for the last century, right? It was pretty much immediately after World War II where the right started hounding communists with the amount of propaganda, the era of McCarthyism and the Red Scare, and honestly, some would say that we are kind of experiencing like a pseudo Red Scare today in the current era. But this is kind of the thing, right? You say it, the monopoly on propaganda, the monopoly on information, and this is largely, as you say, because of the internet. This is what we need as the left to do because we win already. We win already on revolution, right? We know revolution. We handle revolution. We do revolution. That is what we do. That is what we are best at. But it's the steps to take to get to that point that we are lacking on. And I I know that you critique MLs and I critique MLs all the time, and the biggest problem that I have with MLs is that they're copying and pasting the same old structures and kind of systems that have failed historically. And instead of realizing what needs to be done, we just, push it to the side and say, oh, well, we can organize with unions and cooperatives, and we can get better policies in that will allow for this kind of proletarian culture to arise, which isn't actually empirical. It's actually very much not the case, right? And instead, what we're seeing is that due to this, there's actually a strengthening in kind of right-wing propaganda, which is leaning people more and more to the right. So this is where we get figures like Carly Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson. They're the highlight of the internet, the highlight of right-wing propaganda online. It's because there is an existing monopoly on this. And so what the left, what the revolutionary left and true like communists and socialists need to do is we need to get these ideas out there. We need to create networks of information outpost and that's kind of the goal right now. That's kind of the goal
Yep.
of what I'm trying to work with Alistair and other people to do is to create a network of information. And that's what I hope that when I can get a solid podcast started up, that that will happen.
Mhm.
Because right now
Yeah.
we are failing on that cultural aspect, and that's what's killing us, is because until we can appeal to people on that monopoly on information, until we can appeal to people on an information kind of basis or internet basis, we are always going to be a political minority, as we are currently,
Mhm.
as we have been for the last 3, 4 decades. And it sucks to see this. It sucks to see this. It's heartbreaking kind
Yeah.
of see that this is a repeating failure of the left. But it's a failure that needs
Yeah.
to be addressed, not ignored, but recognized.
100%. Mhm. When you mentioned the sort of like groupings essentially of different content creators and so on the left, I think that's very crucial to understand. People always talk about like, or sorry, the way that like the Joe Rogan podcast got popularized wasn't because of Joe Rogan himself, right? It was because of the people he would have on. He would be platforming all these different kinds of mostly right wing like reactionary people, and then going like, "Yo, this is what do you call it? This is like this person that you know of, and this is like something that they say, and like kind of an exclusive interview it becomes, which is a lot more chilled down, and as such they reveal a lot more. And so people then kind of go like, oh yeah, I like this person or that person, and they watch it, and then they continue to watch it, and they continue and they continue, and they get dragged down into this sort of thing. This is why I am still very, though I critique the deprogrammed a lot, I very much support their model where they do the exact same thing and they become insanely popular because of it. I barely watch, I don't even actually, my bad. I don't watch Hakeem. I don't watch, or I don't listen to the deprogram. I don't watch Second Thought. I don't watch any of them. But I hear about them constantly, even from people who aren't radical, like radical left. Even they talk about them, and we can talk about like, oh, they're distorting like views on Marxism, blah blah blah. I do not care. I do not care if I disagree with you. I do not care if any of that.
It is the
You
strategy
have
that
the
they're using.
goal of, yeah, it
It
is
is
a
the strategy that
genuine.
they're using that has value of its own, that needs to be the strategy of the broader left. And it's something that is lacking majorly. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you agree with them or disagree with them, if you think that they're revisionist or anti-revisionist, or if you think that they're MLs or if they're soft Dems. It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the
Yeah,
day, what matters is what they're doing is gaining them attraction, it's gaining them attention, and it is the little splinter of actual like challenge towards the right wing monopoly on this kind of scenario. And we need to create more of
mm,
that. We need to create networks of this strategy. That way, the monopoly of the right will crush. It will crush underneath the pressure of competition and challenge. Because what do we know about monopolies? Monopolies consolidate, and the way that they function is by eliminating all competition. The moment that competition comes to challenge them, they crumble, and they are no
yeah,
longer sufficient. They go into decay. And if we can create networks of the very strategy that Nick and Akeem and Second Thought, and together them as the deep program are using, right? Then we can create a source of information that is independent of broader, um, broader hemisphere of propaganda, broader hemisphere of contemporary, not contemporary, mainstream, right? Mainstream ideas. And this is something that I want to work towards, that I am trying to get people to work towards with me. Um, because the truth is, right? Why do so many people know about right wing like ideas? Why do so many people here in America still support like Israel and defending Israel to its bone. Why do so many people still support what is going on in what NATO is doing in Ukraine? Why do so many people still support the the long kind of cultural hatred towards the global South and the Belt and Road Initiative? It's because there's such a monopoly on these ideas. The small splinter of network that actually works is what's the word I'm looking for? It's minuscule, right? It's so small that it doesn't actually make an impact. And so yeah, so as a movement, as a side, as a political movement, we need to do this more.
Yeah, I find the way that the modern like reactionaries utilize information is absolutely fascinating because you can turn someone like the butcher of Benghazi, Jens Stoltenberg, into like something that saved like the Labour Party from absolutely fucking crumbling. They were able to turn this guy who killed hundreds to thousands of people in Libya, who dropped bombs on children and sold people into slave markets, into this glorified hero of this country, and it's absolutely insane. And whenever then like you point this out, people try to cope about it because that's all they know. They have been constantly told, no, war is good, peace is bad, but actually saying that would go counter to their narrative. It's I don't like to give fucking what's his name, George Orwell, any good shit, but like his concept of doublespeak is genuine. It is totalitarian, and it is here. I talked about this a moment ago. How within the way that information travels today, the dominant idea is good is bad, bad is good. As mentioned, with war is good. So, for an example, whenever I talk to like Norwegian social democrats about like, hey, Stoltenberg bombed fucking Libya, that's not something to be proud of. They just go like, yeah, but it was a U.S. mandate. And that makes it any fucking better. This one guy, when during a debate, like this was a panel debate between different parties. Um, During a debate, I brought up the bombing of Yugoslavia, and and the response which I got was like, "Yeah, but I knew a guy who was a peacekeeper in Yugoslavia." Okay, that doesn't make it any fucking better. The way that they view it, like view it, not say it. That is the key distinction. The way that they view it is war is good. But if they actually say this, they will their entire actual system will begin to crumble, and as such, they have to justify their terror and war and destruction upon everyone else as something that is just good, you know?
Right. No, you're not wrong at all. Um, yeah, no, it's interesting seeing that this is the case. And if you want to know about somebody who kind of brings up similar kind of conclusions and talking points that isn't Orwell, and you don't want to give credit to Orwell, which I completely understand, right? Orwell is not something that the left should at all be willing to like make apologetics towards. But um, there is a more, I guess you could say, more leftist leaning or left leaning figure. You don't agree with everything that he says, but he's he's all right. Chomsky, he actually wrote a book called Who Controls the World. And in the book, I have a copy of it. In the book, he kind of outlines the very nature of how, like you said, he doesn't use the terminology, but kind of describes it how you say good is bad and bad is good, where they control such degree of information and culture and propaganda and sides of talking that every aspect of truly democratizing um, like production and economics is seen as totalitarian to them. But in reality, what they're supporting, what they're voting in, what they're allowing to happen is totalitarian in of itself and is a reversion of democracy.
Yeah, 100%. I think I one time's latest kind of shit, but he has another video which is actually very good. I'll see if I can find it here, but it was one where he talked about kind of totalitarian democracy. Let me see if I can find it. Um,
I
but
mean,
in that one,
literally Lassalleanism.
yeah, exactly. But in that one, he takes up quite a few very interesting points about kind of like how. Oh, here we go. Uh, it's it's now members only. Wasn't always that. Okay, that's weird. Anyway, why the U.S. government can't get anything done? Um, and I think there was another one, if I remember correctly, but I'm not too sure. But anyway, that's not the point. In that one, he talks about kind of like how controlled opposition within the U.S. Works, how it's able to kind of keep this influence on people. And again, a large part of it is information. It is kind of like pushing people into believing things that just like doesn't make sense, but for some reason it just makes sense, quote unquote, according to these people. It's nonsensical sense. It's nonsensical sense, right? You have
Nonsensical sense. Yeah,
two
no, that's
contradicting.
interesting.
Yeah, it's the same with the amount of people. I don't know if you've seen this been going around, but there's so many people now who are just going like, "Oh, we got to get rid of these Marxist corporations," and then like some guy goes in the comments there and go like, "Yeah, we should abolish
So yeah,
like
I've actually seen
markets."
this. I've actually seen
Yeah,
this
yeah.
exact thing that you're talking about. So about a year ago, actually, and I'm still in contact with the guy, by the way. I'm still in contact with the guy who I had this discussion over. He knows I'm a Marxist, but me and him have talked about it, and I kind of getting him to like realize that okay, I agree with like, or not that I agree with him, but that he actually agrees with me. I just
Mhm.
have to use a certain language that doesn't trigger him because if I could just come out as an outright, um, an outright commie, I'm gonna scare him away, which is okay. But
Mhm.
if I do scare him away, then he shouldn't be around. But if we can get these people who are culturally anti-us to come over and actually listen and hear us out, we have potential to
Yeah.
change them and actually increase the the capacity of the left because we're a minority and we have to expand. We have to expand or we're going to die, right? As I've been saying it for a couple of months now. MLs are a dying breed. But going back to this guy that I've spoken to for a little while, he once sent me this link, and I looked at this link, and it was like the current evil of our time, the current threat to Western civilization, corporate Marxism, banking Marxism, uh, the authoritarian Marxism, cultural Marxism, and I'm like looking at this, and I'm like, I don't think this guy's ever picked up a book and actually read Marx
Yeah.
because yeah, this goes against everything that we are actually trying to build. In fact, what it reflects is what is actually currently existing. And it's so funny
Yeah.
because again, people today do not know what real democracy looks like. They take democracy as totalitarian, and they take totalitarianism as democratic, and it's sad.
Yeah. I think one thing that we need to do as the like as revolutionary left is that we need to push against the narrative of like both the Marxist-Leninist narrative and the dominate sort of idea narrative, where we don't talk about like a state structure in the same way that like just ending up being just Lassallean, right? No, we do not want a state that just administrates capitalism from above. No, what we want is democracy in the economy. We want you to be able to have a say in the economy, right? That's something that's a sort of point of rhetoric that we need to push for, right? Whenever your boss puts you up for bullshit reasons, like I don't know, you were sick one day, or you have or you're mourning, or whatever else there may be, you're struggling, maybe you have a depressive period, whatever the fuck, you should not be put up on that. You should not be just fucked over because of that. And that's something that we need to push more on. Instead of just being like, no, guys, we want a state that gives healthcare to the people. And it's like, okay, sure, you've gotten healthcare now. What the fuck else do you do? Is the goal just healthcare? Is the goal just cheaper housing? If that's where it ends, then you are no better than them socks. You're no better than sock dems, right? We need to push the left to be actually radical again.
Yeah, no, because there's all this talk amongst the left about, class struggle, class war, class conflict, and then there's never any acting on it. And it's sad to see this because the reality is that the ability to have a revolution is literally right in front of us. We could do it. We could have one. We could actually build a democratic system from the bottom up, from instead of from the top down, right? Because top down structures have historically always just reproduced and reconstructed the very capitalist mindsets that we have always condemned, right? If you're truly revolutionary, you've always condemned this. And this is where I say today, MLs are reactionary socialists. They are reactionaries in every single aspect of the word. They're reactionary because they only come about when things are in a crippling state of decay and they want to try to manage the current state of affairs. They don't take that they don't take that line in the German ideology of what communism actually is and follow through with it. And I will quote, right? What Marx and Engels say is that communism to us is not a state or is not a set of values to be imposed on society. Communism to us is the real movement is the real movement of the working class, is the abolition of the current state of things, not the preservation of it, but the abolition of it. They're very clear. And then I will expand this by going further and saying that, okay, if we really want the decay of capitalism, we cannot preserve it at every cost. I got into an argument a couple weeks ago with people in Second Thought server about, well, I think that fascists, Nazis, and socialists and communists are all different. And I stated why. And I said, well, okay, fascism is not actually capitalism in decay. Real capitalism in decay, as Luxemburg says, it's either socialism or barbarism. You choose. Either we organize and have a revolution, or we go into a state of absolute decay of ecological structures, of economic relations, and it's the worst of all for everyone. But instead, what fascism truly is, it is a form of utopian socialist thought that preserves capitalist relations at every corner. If we want to apply this understanding of fascism historically in Mussolini's Italy to anywhere, what current state shows most aligned to that? Modern day China. And that's the sad reality. That is the sad reality. I cannot sit by and continue to watch what was once a legacy of revolutionary thought die out completely into this cultural shift of what revolution actually is.
I still think that there is revolutionary sentiment within China, but I do think that it's dwindling a lot. A lot of Marxist theories being taken up by reactionaries within China and worked into a justification for capital
Right.
rather than the attempt at abolishing it.
Right,
The
and
amount of text.
we shouldn't look at China as either like be anti-China or pro-China, right? We should look at it objectively from a material standpoint and see what it is and what to do about it.
Yeah. The amount of text from Chinese distributors and publishers, which I've found, which talk mostly about Marxism in the perspective of like, oh yeah, this is how China governs. I showed you a while ago a website, if I can find it here. Yeah, Purple Culture. It's a distributor for the Chinese foreign languages press. And in that one, I'll see if I can find it here, but it has like, what's it called? Like the Marxist theory on property, I think it was. If I find it here. Yeah. So the Marxist theory on property rights. And the Chinese model. That's the full name.
Oh,
But
interesting.
yeah,
Send that to
there's
me and
also
I'll read through it because it's interesting that you find that and that you bring this up because I mean, just understanding general property relations as understood by even just the book, like even just volume one of Capital, and then furthermore in wage labor and uh, oh my God, wage labor and
Wage labor and
value
capital.
price of profit, and then what's the other one?
Wage labor and capital.
Wage labor and capital. Thank you. Uh, And understanding those two texts and volume one of Capital, what we see is that the property relations that exist under capitalism are kind of emphasized more in the Chinese situation, where there isn't really the abolition of private property, and the closest that we see to actual socialized production is joint property relations. So it's not actually socialized production. What it is, it's private property that is under the mandate of the state and is being governed by the state, managed by the state, and the party of the state, right? And so this is important to understand because and I know that there's a couple of Chinese economists and philosophers who will say that unlike Western societies, China doesn't elevate capital above the state. It may not elevate it above the state, but what it does is it allows the state to be the manifestation of capital in its truest form. I
yeah,
get a lot of lashback when I say that China is imperialist because, I mean, if we analyze the Belt and Road Initiative, it is the export of finance capital. Pure as simple as that. End of story. It is literally the export of finance capital into foreign, um, abroad lands, right? And it uses that finance capital to actually gain control over foreign production to some degree. While it may have better benefits and better relations than the West, it is still imperialism by definition. So we need to understand China, and we need to understand that um, it's not a perfect model. It's not so far long gone as like there can't be anything done about it. There can be, and there is revolutionary potential in China, but the left needs to come together and understand that socialism hasn't existed. It doesn't exist, and we need to make it exist. Or again, it's
yeah,
going to be a matter of how Luxemburg said, socialism or barbarism. I don't. This is the conclusion that has led me in my in my current days to where I am and why I am so anti-MLism, why I'm so anti-electoralism.
yeah. I think the current issue in which we're seeing is that Marxism-Leninism is the dominant ideology. And as I mentioned, whenever the end goal is simply Lassallean economics of just like administrating capitalism from above, it becomes difficult to say the least. You don't actually get a different society. No, you get a different discussion of capital and how capital should be moved. And I'm saying how capital should be moved because that's essentially what this form is. Does that mean that these systems weren't genuine attempts at change? Well, they were. They did try to make genuine changes. Did they succeed at it? To some extent, yeah. But they ultimately didn't, right? And so what we need to do is push for more alternative sources within Marxism. So many Marxists are just fine with having read like maybe the manifesto and then maybe like a few works of Lenin and then just Stalin and Mao, maybe Hoja if they're feeling spicy. It's like,
Right.
what about the other theorists? What about Kautsky? What about Joseph Dietzkin? What about Bogdanov? What about any of these? No, because they were revisionist, right?
Or even
They become conservative.
what about contemporary theorists such as Aaron Bastani, Richard Wolff, right? What about people like Goldman? And like we need to understand that there are contemporary theories and strategies today, but the left is so what's the word? Detached from understanding that history has shown failure, and that the point of historical and dialectical materialism is to self-criticize and overcome failures. I I'm under the impression that if Marx and Engels were alive today, they would be disgusted by the left. They wouldn't even consider the left to be communist.
No, they wouldn't. The exact same things in which we're seeing today, Marxists of the past spent countless years critiquing. If this was anyone from Plekhanov to Kautsky to Lenin, whoever, they critiqued this thoroughly, and yet we have learned nothing. Because all the modern left thinks is, no, yeah, we just need to. They say we need to adapt to our conditions, and then they start digging themselves in the books, and then they go nowhere. But once you leave that sort of actionism or purely actionism or purely bookism or intellectualism or intellectual masturbation more so, you get a completely different perspective. You're able to see that like this isn't just what's the word I'm looking for? This isn't just something that someone wrote that's pretty cool. No, it is a genuine observation of that period, and specifically that period. What can you learn? What can you take with you? And what do you have to abandon? Right?
Right.
Mm.
And I've tried my hardest to have discussions with people of the current left and bring them to understanding that we need new ideas. We need new ideas and we need new strategies. How are we going to do this? Okay. How are we going to do this? But the reality is that without having these networks of information, so again, right, come back to there's a monopoly on information. How do we combat that monopoly on information? Well, we create decentralized networks of outpost of information that will continue to educate people of younger generations of curiosity, of people who are actually discontented with the left right, blue red, liberal conservative mindset. The vast majority of people in America today are hyperly discontent with the system at large, but they have no alternative. They have no third choice. And because of that, they conform, and there's nothing out there telling them otherwise. So that's what I'm working on. That's what we need to work on. That's what the left needs to do is work on putting those alternatives out there instead of being like, oh, we can go back to the 1910s and the 1940s, Russia and China, and we can just redo what they did. No, 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 no. That's a misunderstanding of history. It's a misunderstanding of current material conditions. I don't know how many times I need to listen to an ML say, "Oh, the material conditions for revolution aren't right. Oh, well, we need the material conditions for revolution in America." What do you think, what do you think it is right now? Like, what do you think the vast majority of having a service economy, having a literal workforce that doesn't create any industrial capacity, but all they're doing is generating debt value. Debt value, by the way, is not real value because it's not creating anything of actual material wealth. It's not creating anything of actual material substance. We're just creating financial banking structures, we're literally fueling the the crypto the crypto kind of economics that are existing. We're fueling that in America because there is no industrial capital in America. There hasn't been industrial capital in America for well beyond 30 years. And so, yeah, the left is going to continue to fail. The left is going to continue to conform because there is no branching out of ideas for the vast majority of the left. And so that's what we need to do is we need to look at new ideas, we need to come up with new strategies, and we need to posit those as much as we can. And I've done this on the context of like housing, where I proposed a lending system that will essentially decommodify houses. I've done this in numerous ways where a friend of mine actually he's published now, I think, three or four of my articles on a DSA website page. And it's helped him in his area and in his community to actually make local changes. Why? Because they're new ideas and they're new strategies that actually work instead of trying to copy and paste what has historically have been done, right? Because what has historically been done, well, why didn't it work? Why did what happened in the past come to be deconstructed? It's because was a failing. It was failing from the start. It was doomed to fail. So we need to create new strategies.
Yeah. With that being said, I do have to go.
Okay, no, I get it. I hope though that while you're branching out and engaging more in Norwegian politics, that something of light does come for the left there and for the communists there,
Mm.
because the reality is that with the growing discontent in the West, it's a matter of time, and we need to be a part of that waking up of class warfare, of class consciousness.
100%. I will say a lot of people in the Red Party, specifically Red Youth, are branching into the internet, myself included. I'm planning on working on a Norwegian language, like TikTok, Instagram, so on, where I talk about Norwegian and Sami revolutionary history, because that's what I do best. There are other people within the party who do other things, like, for an example, a friend of mine in the South who works on kind of popularizing countercultural topics. Like, for an example, okay, this is going to sound weird, but like, hey, it's not okay to rape. Like, that should be a no-brainer.
Right.
Apparently a lot of people are falling into kind of like accidental justification of rape, um, due to the fact that like the Progress Party leadership are very notorious for having rape cases. Um, yeah. So, like, for an example, popularizing like, hey, this is something that they do. There are other content creators who focus on other things, like, for example, hey, this is the economic aspect, this is what they do, and so on and so on. But it's mostly just parliamentary politics. So
Yeah,
I want to put.
I've been
Hmm?
following a couple of social media pages myself that have been doing this, where they've been exposing the hypocrisy of both sides, where they've been exposing certain economic, cultural, and political things of both sides, and realizing that okay, these things need to be addressed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, for me, I've been looking at like Hypocrisy Hammer, an Instagram page, and Priest Politics, which is very good for its open support of the Palestinian cause. But yeah, no, with that being said, Matty, do you have anything that you want to discuss any further?
No, not really.
Okay. Greg, then if that is everything, then I do wish you a good night. I think that's
All right.
going to wrap up my stream.
I'll see you later, man.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.